You're listening to Blossoming Technologist, a podcast for young professionals in tech discovering skills, careers, and tips for being in the tech industry. I'm your host, Marisa, and today we're joined by a very special guest, my very own brother, Sean Hoenig. Sean is a proposal manager at Advanced Space in Westminster, Colorado. He has over 7 years of experience in research and development, as well as a bachelor's and master's in chemical engineering from Lehigh University. Today is going to be the first of a few mini interviews, which will be sprinkled throughout season 3. We're going to talk today about research and development in aerospace and how to write grant proposals. Sean, welcome to the show.
Hey, finally made it since the dawn of the podcast. Finally got here.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, I have denied Sean a spot on my podcast for a long time. So I finally agreed to have him on the show, and I'm excited that he's here.
Well, I mean, the reason is really we've had this debate really about what the tech industry is. And I think Marisa considers the tech industry mostly software based, whereas I consider the tech industry the greater realm of R&D and innovation in our culture. And so for me, I consider any company that's doing R&D, hardware, software, what have you, to be part of the tech industry, whereas the traditional tech industry might just be the software companies of the world. Is that a fair assessment?
That's very fair. And I'm not going to debate you, but that is why he hasn't been on the podcast yet. But I'm excited to have him here so he can talk about his realm of the tech industry. So with that, Sean, can you tell us more about your current role as a proposal manager?
Yeah, absolutely. So early this year, I started a new role with a company called Advanced Space. I am their proposal manager. So what that means is that the company has to go out and raise funding. So normally, a small company in the tech industry will raise funds through venture capitalists or angel investors. And I'm sure you've talked about that on your podcast in some fashion. And a lot of that capital that a company would receive would lead to equity into the company from the people that are investing their money. In the case of what I do and what a lot of folks in this realm do is that they receive money from the government, which is called non-dilutive capital, which means that there's no equity invested from the government in the company. So basically, you're getting free money from the government to carry out projects that satisfy what the government is trying to accomplish, whether it's with NASA or the Department of Defense, Department of Energy. There is money out there in different vehicles in order to get that money.
So in R&D, I know that you are in the aerospace sector. Can you talk about what's involved there, what you do, and which of these areas have a tech focus?
Yeah, sure. So let me give maybe an overview of my company first, and that'll help kind of guide things. So my company, Advanced Space, is actually leading humanity's return to the moon. And what that means is that they're launching a mission in May, actually, called the Capstone mission. And that is plotting a navigation path for spacecrafts to go to the moon. And this is directly related to the Gateway and the Artemis program that NASA is heading up. And that is to establish exploration and a bases at the moon so that we can explore further into space. They're also using this mission to test ways of communicating between different spacecraft from a peer-to-peer basis. So instead of using ground stations to communicate with spacecrafts, they have a way to allow satellites to talk to each other in space. So from a technology standpoint, there are a few different aspects of R&D that are involved in the aerospace sector. So if we get into it a little bit, there's a push for autonomous navigation. So the way we see self-driving cars, the same idea kind of applies for spacecraft. You want spacecraft that can be on autopilot, that can navigate through space based on different algorithms that are developed for them. There's also machine learning. There's artificial intelligence projects that are used so that related directly to autonomous navigation and other technologies in order for the spacecraft to know what to do and how to maneuver in space given different conditions that are changing around them. There's also operations to look at refueling. So how can you refuel a spacecraft directly in the space? So you don't have to bring it back down to Earth. You can just do it directly there. There's also resource mining. So you might have a situation where you want to extract water ice from the moon to use as fuel, or you want to get other precious minerals from asteroids and use those. And so there's a lot of technology in these areas between, like we said, peer-to-peer navigation, refueling, resource mining, orbital physics, how to plot spacecraft's direct navigation paths through space. So that's really kind of an idea of what is going on in this field.
Okay, so you as the proposal manager are kind of figuring out what these next pieces of work are for your company, and those might involve doing the automation of the spacecraft, stuff like that, which others in your company do, correct?
Yeah, so I think a lot of your listeners will probably understand that when they receive projects, and those projects they have to be creative on in order to solve a problem. In this case, it's kind of one step ahead of that. It's creating the project. It's working with the government, or it's working with the commercial partner to figure out what their needs are and what technologies can solve their solution, and then putting that together in a way that is going to be very attractive to them, price-wise, technology-wise. Your team, is your team capable of doing this? So it's one step up from the point in which you get a project, and then you have to come up with the algorithms. You have to come up with the software that's going to do what you said is going to do.
Gotcha. That relates a lot to what I do in my job as a software developer, where, like you said, I am at the point where the project's already figured out and I have to implement it. But then it's almost like you would have a proposal manager before that, or whatever they're called in software, to figure out what we actually need and what we need to build.
Exactly.
Cool. So as a proposal manager, you have to get these proposals approved. So what are these grant proposals used for, and what is that process for actually getting them approved?
So the government has recurring calls for funding year round, and there's different vehicles that are used to get that funding. So there's BAAs, which are broad agency announcements. Those are open to universities, or open to large companies, small companies, nonprofits. Anyone can apply to them. You have Small Business Innovation Research, SBIR, which is used as a way to allow small businesses to build up their companies and create technologies at a low TRL, low technology readiness level, and get to a point where you can commercialize something. There's also OTAs, other transactional agreements, which is a way where something's semi-well established, and it's kind of a term used in the national security area, where it's similar to a BAA, where lots of different people are applying, but usually you have to be part of an organization already to apply to it. So there's different ways that these funding opportunities come out, and in order to get them approved, it's basically internally within your company and your partners, you send out a formal document. That formal document is then reviewed by the funding agency, and they score it. Depending on how the scoring goes, you either get selected or you don't.
How long are these documents usually?
It depends. I've seen sometimes there's white papers where you just submit like a 5-page document outlining your basics of what you can do and your teaming. There's stuff where it's 30 pages and 50 pages, depending. Usually the more pages you have, the more money you're getting. It's a general guideline.
That feels like a way to cheat the system, like write more pages to get more money.
Well, no, there's limits. So there's limits, right? So you can only submit 10 pages. You can only submit 20 pages.
Gotcha.
But usually it correlates with the amount of money they're willing to give you, because there's more going on. But also the probabilities are low. These are not guaranteed events. In order, the win probability is usually around 20% or lower, depending on, if it's a phase 1, a BAA, a phase 2. So there's all kinds of that we could get into there.
Yeah. How many proposals do you typically submit in a given year? Does it just depend?
It depends. Most companies try to target opportunities that are directly related to their mission objectives. So it's someone in business development, such as myself, has to go out and understand the landscape what is the Department of Energy doing in our area? What is the Department of Defense doing? What's the Air Force doing? And then go back and like figure that out. And there's actually ways to influence them through RFIs, which are requests for information. So sometimes the government's wondering about a topic, and we basically submit information to them and to help them create their funding opportunity. So there are different ways to interact with them. And there's also, you meet people at conferences, and then, depending on what you find, in that, given those activities, you will apply to whatever makes sense. So there's really no right answer. It just depends.
First of all, that's the consulting answer that I do as a developer consultant, but it depends. And you might win this debate on being in the tech industry because you have so many acronyms that it's just like software. So I don't know. All right. Anyway, I have another question for you. So when you write proposals in the government space specifically, what are some challenges that you've come across?
Okay. So some certain challenges, I would say IP protection is pretty important. So the interesting thing about a handful of these vehicles to get money is that usually the government becomes the sole source customer, which allows you these special data rights so that you can, whatever innovation you came up with, whether it's software, hardware, the government becomes your immediate customer. And so that gives you a vehicle to create more cash flow in your company. IP protection becomes a bigger problem when you start talking about, what the government wants to be in charge of and what your company wants to hold on to. So I think I'm still learning a lot about that, being in the software aerospace realm right now. Collective brainstorming is very difficult. You have to have people that are willing, to say yes and to encourage each other and figure out new ideas. And creating new ideas is not easy. I think it's easier when you have a scope and you have a project that someone's telling you, I need this, and it's a little bit more bounded. But when you don't really have any bounds, there's anything that you can get into. So the bounds come from the government, and then you have to kind of fill in the gaps based on your background to come up with good ideas.
Is that collective brainstorming like a bunch of people in a room just whiteboarding, coming up with ideas, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think it is difficult to come up with the right ideas, right? Because you can come up with any idea and hope that it, I've seen a lot of proposals that were great ideas that don't get funded. And so it's difficult to come up with the best ideas to get funded. That's kind of my take on that. And then you already touched on it a little bit, but finding the right opportunities, you got to kind of balance this between what your company wants to do and what is out there. So there's this balance between how do you find what fits what we're good at, and then where do we branch out and like create a new realm of expertise.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of challenges to work through, but you still figure it out and get through it. That's all the questions I had for you about research and development. And I just wanted to end on our final question that I ask every guest. This is no surprise, but what is one skill that you're currently working on? So
one skill I'm currently working on is proposal strategy development, figuring out what other companies do to win proposals. There's lots of literature, there's lots of books out there. There's things called like the Shipley method, which is something a lot of large corporations use. So I'm starting to learn, what do other people do to help win proposals besides what I've already learned in my career so far, and trying to apply that to become a better business development manager.
Proposal strategy sounds super cool and sounds like you're learning a lot from other people and improving yourself, which we always love to see. That is it for Blossoming Technologists. Thank you so much, Sean, for being here. And thank you, listeners, for listening to Blossoming Technologist. Make sure to check out the show notes for any links mentioned, as well as ways to contact Sean about anything you heard today. If you like this episode, please share it with your friends or leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts. And with that, I'll see you next time where we'll continue blossoming together.